Las Vegas, Nevada. The International Hotel. August 1972. Saturday evening, 11:30 p.m. Outside, the neon lights of the Strip are a fever dream of gold, red, and electric blue, pulsing with the frantic energy of a city that never sleeps. But inside the Grand Ballroom, the air is different. It is thick, heavy, and charged with a tension that has nothing to do with the spinning roulette wheels or the clatter of slot machines downstairs. 200 people are packed into this space, the elite of the martial arts world, champions from every corner of the globe, gathered for the after-party of the International Karate Championships. There are no cameras here, no reporters, no bright studio lights. Just the low hum of conversation and the clink of glasses. But tonight the atmosphere is not celebratory, it is expected. Whispers have been circulating for 3 hours, moving from table to table like a slow-burning fuse. It started as a conversation in the corner of the room, a simple debate about speed, timing, and the limitations of traditional forms. But it has grown into something else, a challenge that shouldn't exist, a moment that will either become the most guarded legend in the history of combat or be buried forever in the desert sands. In the center of the room stands Chuck Norris. He is 32 years old, the reigning professional world middleweight karate champion, a man whose name is synonymous with American martial arts excellence. He is 5 feet 10 inches of rugged, disciplined power, his movements precise, his reputation impeccable. Beside him sits Bruce Lee. He is also 32, a man who has spent the last decade tearing down the walls of tradition to build something the world isn't yet ready to understand. He is 5 feet 7 inches, 135 pounds of vibrating energy, looking more like a philosopher in his dark silk shirt than a fighter. They are friends. They have trained together in backyards and private gyms for years. But tonight, in front of the world's greatest fighters, the air between them has changed. A question has been asked, one that cannot be ignored. A challenge has been issued that will test the very foundation of their friendship and their arts. The crowd has gone quiet, sensing the shift. This isn't a movie set. This isn't a demonstration for the public. This is a moment of truth between two men who have reached the pinnacle of their respective worlds. And in 9 seconds, the history of martial arts is about to be rewritten in a way that will leave every witness in this room speechless. Chuck Norris is not just a champion. He is a monument to the effectiveness of traditional martial arts. Standing in the ballroom, his presence is grounded, immovable. He has defended his world title 6 times. He has beaten the best karateka in the world, men who trained with a ferocity that bordered on the suicidal. His sidekick is a legend in its own right, a strike so powerful it has been known to break ribs through heavy leather padding. Chuck is a man of honor, a man of quiet confidence, who doesn't need to brag because his record speaks for itself. But tonight, he is the representative of the old guard, the defender of the system that made him a king. He has watched Bruce Lee for years. He has listened to Bruce's critiques of traditional styles and heard him call classical forms organized despair. Chuck respects Bruce more than almost anyone, but there is a part of him, the competitor, the champion, that wonders. He knows Bruce is fast. He knows Bruce is revolutionary, but he also knows that Bruce has never stepped into a professional ring, never fought under the pressure of a world championship clock. In Chuck's world, power and durability are the ultimate currency. He has taken the best shots from heavyweights and kept moving forward. He believes in the structure of the kata, the power of the chambered punch, the reliability of the traditional stance. As he stands there, glass in hand, the conversation around him has turned to the inevitable topic. Could the speed of Jeet Kune Do actually overcome the seasoned, battle-tested power of a world karate champion? Chuck smiles, his blue eyes calm. He isn't angry. He isn't seeking a fight to prove his ego, but he is curious. He wants to know if the theories Bruce discusses in private are truly applicable when the distance is closed and the intent is real. He looks across the room at Bruce, who is talking animatedly about the non-telegraphed strike. Chuck sets his glass down on a linen-covered table. The movement is deliberate. The room notices. A hush begins to spread from the center outward. He walks toward Bruce, not with aggression, but with the steady, rhythmic gait of a man who has spent 10,000 hours on a dojo floor. The crowd parts. The champions of the world hold their breath. The king of karate is about to ask the question that has been burning in the minds of everyone in the room for 4 years. Bruce Lee doesn't see Chuck approaching with his eyes. He feels the change in the room's vibration. That is the essence of his training: total awareness, a mind like a mirror that reflects everything and clings to nothing. He is in the middle of explaining the concept of the leading punch to a group of Japanese masters, his hands moving in small, flickering arcs that the eye can barely track. Bruce is at the height of his physical and intellectual powers. He is a man obsessed with the elimination of the unnecessary. To Bruce, every movement that doesn't contribute to the immediate neutralization of an opponent is a waste of life. He has spent years studying biomechanics, physics, and philosophy, distilling them into a system that isn't a system at all, but a way of being. He is aware of his reputation. He knows that many in this room view him as a movie guy or a showman. He knows they value their black belts and their trophies, things he views as shackles on the true warrior spirit. When Chuck Norris stops 5 feet away, Bruce turns. His expression is neutral, his body relaxed, his hands hanging loosely at his sides. There is no tension in Bruce Lee, only potential. "Chuck," Bruce says, his voice quiet but resonant. The Japanese master stepped back, sensing the gravity of the encounter. Chuck looks at Bruce, his face a mask of professional respect. "Bruce," Chuck begins, "I've been listening to you talk about the 1-inch punch and the non-telegraphed strike for years. I've seen the demonstrations. I've seen you hit the heavy bags. But tonight, looking at all these champions here, there's a debate. A lot of these guys think that against a real, seasoned guard, against someone who knows how to absorb a blow, that speed wouldn't translate into stopping power." Chuck pauses, his gaze steady. "I'm one of them. I think size and traditional structure provide a defense that speed alone can't penetrate. I think if I were to stand in front of you, braced and ready, that magic wouldn't work." The room is now deathly silent. This isn't a tavern brawl challenge. This is a collision of 2 world views. Bruce Lee smiles, a small, knowing tilt of the lips. He doesn't look offended. He looks like a scientist who has just been offered the perfect laboratory. "The truth is not something you talk about, Chuck," Bruce responds. "The truth is something you experience. You want to see if the speed is real or if it's just a movie trick." Chuck nods. "I want to see if you can move faster than I can react. I want to see if your strike has the power to stop a man of my mass." The conditions are set in less than a minute. Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris move to a cleared space in the center of the ballroom. The witnesses form a dense, jagged circle of the greatest karateka, judoka, and boxers of the era, men whose lives are defined by the mechanics of violence. They are standing on a plush, red-carpeted floor, a surface that offers no stability for traditional power generation. Bruce insists on the terms: no gloves, no gear. This is not a fight. This is a demonstration of a single moment. You stand, you brace, you use your best defensive structure. I will strike once, just once. If you block it, or if it doesn't move you, then the traditionalists are right. If it works, then you know that speed is just another word for timing." Chuck agrees. He removes his suit jacket, handing it to his student, Bob Wall. Beneath his white dress shirt, the outline of his massive chest and shoulders is clear. He is 75 pounds heavier than Bruce. He is a man who has spent his life conditioning his body to be a fortress. Chuck plants his feet in a classic Sanchin-style stance weight, low, knees slightly turned in, core locked like a bank vault. This is the stance of the immovable object. He raises his hands in a high, tight guard, protecting his jaw and his solar plexus, but leaving enough space for Bruce to find a target. He is offering himself as a laboratory. He is confident. He has been hit by the hardest punchers in the world, and he has never been knocked down in his professional career. He looks at Bruce and nods. "Whenever you're ready, Bruce, give me your best shot. I won't move. I won't evade. I'll just take it." Bruce Lee doesn't immediately move into a stance. He stands 3 feet away, his hands still at his sides. He begins to breathe a specific, rhythmic inhalation that seems to expand his entire torso. His eyes lock onto Chuck's center mass. He isn't looking at Chuck's face. He is looking through him. The air in the ballroom feels as though it has been sucked out. 200 of the most dangerous men on earth are holding their breath. The tension is so thick it feels like a physical weight pressing down on the observers. For 3 seconds, Bruce Lee is as still as a statue. Then, he takes a single small step forward, closing the gap to exactly 24 inches. In the world of Bruce Lee, there is a concept called the interval. It is the microscopic gap in time between an opponent's thought and their action. As Bruce stands 24 inches from Chuck Norris, he is searching for that interval. Chuck is a master of defense. Even standing still, his body is instinctively adjusting, his muscles micro-tensing in anticipation. To the crowd, it looks like two men standing in a ballroom. To the two men in the center, it is a high-speed chess match, played at the level of the nervous system. Bruce's right hand begins to rise, slowly, almost lazily. It isn't a fist. His fingers are loose, his palm open. He places the tips of his fingers against the center of Chuck's chest, right over the sternum. The crowd murmurs. Is this the setup? Is he going to push him? Bruce looks at Chuck, his eyes burning with an intensity that seems to vibrate. Brace yourself, Chuck, Bruce whispers. Chuck narrows his eyes, his entire body becoming a single piece of tempered steel. He shifts his weight forward slightly, preparing to absorb a massive forward force. He expects a shove. He expects a lunging punch. He expects a display of brute strength. But Bruce Lee doesn't believe in brute strength. He believes in the flicker. He withdraws his hand exactly 3 inches. Just 3 inches of space between his knuckles and Chuck's chest. Bruce's lead foot is planted, his rear heel slightly raised. The crowd leans in, some standing on chairs to see over the shoulders of the front row. They are waiting for the windup. They are waiting for the shoulder to dip or the hip to rotate. In the world of traditional karate, power is built from the ground up, moving through a visible sequence of muscle contractions. But Bruce has spent years eliminating that sequence. He has learned to fire his entire body simultaneously, a coordinated explosion of every fiber at once. 9 seconds have passed since they took their positions. The room is so silent, you can hear the hum of the air conditioning. Chuck is ready. He's the immovable object. And then, without a single flicker of warning, Bruce Lee moves. The strike doesn't look like a punch. It looks like a glitch in reality. There is no wind-up, no retraction of the arm, no visible shift in Bruce's weight. One moment, Bruce's hand is 3 inches from Chuck's chest. The next, there is a sound that will haunt the witnesses for the rest of their lives. It isn't the thud of a glove or the slap of a hand. It is a sharp, percussive crack, like a whip breaking the sound barrier or a dry branch snapping in a silent forest. The force doesn't hit Chuck's surface. It seems to bypass his skin and muscle entirely. It is a penetrating wave of kinetic energy. Chuck Norris, a man of 210 pounds of solid muscle, a man braced in a world champion defensive stance, is not just pushed. He is lifted. His lead foot leaves the red carpet. His entire frame is jerked backward as if hit by an invisible cannonball. He travels 4 feet through the air before his heels catch the carpet. His body, usually a marvel of controlled movement, stumbles. He hits a heavy mahogany table, sending glasses and ice flying before finally coming to a halt. The crowd is paralyzed. 200 martial arts masters are frozen mid-breath. They have just seen the fastest, most durable karate champion in the world, treated like a rag doll by a man who didn't even seem to move. Chuck is doubled over, his hands on his knees. His face, usually tan and composed, has gone a ghostly shade of gray. He isn't moving. He isn't breathing. The silence in the ballroom is absolute. It is the silence of a crowd that has just seen a law of physics broken in front of their eyes. 9 seconds. From the moment Bruce Lee settled his gaze to the moment Chuck Norris hit the table, only 9 seconds had elapsed, and in that time, the world of martial arts changed forever. 5 seconds pass, then 6. Chuck Norris is still bent over, his chest heaving as his body tries to remember how to pull in oxygen. The crack of the impact is still echoing in the ears of the witnesses. Bruce Lee doesn't move. He doesn't celebrate. He doesn't strike a pose. He stands exactly where he was, his hands back at his sides, his breathing as calm as a man sitting in a garden. He watches Chuck with a look of profound, quiet respect. He knows what he just did. He didn't just hit a friend. He delivered a shock to the system The 1-inch punch isn't about breaking bones. It's about a massive transfer of energy to the internal organs and the nervous system. It creates a temporary paralysis of the diaphragm. Chuck finally sucks in a ragged, gasping breath. Then another. He straightens up slowly, his hand pressed against his sternum. He looks at Bruce, and for the first time in his professional life, the legend of karate looks genuinely shocked. He walks back toward the center of the circle, his legs slightly unsteady. He looks down at his own chest, then back at Bruce's hand. "I didn't see it," Chuck says, his voice hoarse, barely audible to those in the front row. "I was watching your eyes. I was watching your shoulders. I was ready for the movement. But there was no movement. It was just there." Bruce nods slowly. "If you see the movement, it's already too late, Chuck. If I have to show you I'm hitting you, I've already failed. The strike must be like a thought. It has no beginning and no end." The crowd begins to murmur, a low, rising tide of disbelief and debate. "Did you see that? He didn't even lunge. How did he generate that much force from 3 inches?" The champions of the world are arguing like white belts. They are trying to reconcile what they know of mechanics with what they just witnessed. Chuck Norris takes a deep breath, his color slowly returning. He extends his hand. Bruce takes it, and the two men embrace a moment of mutual recognition between two warriors who have just shared a truth that words could never reach. "You were right, Bruce," Chuck says, loud enough for the circle to hear. "The structure doesn't matter if the energy is already inside the gate. That wasn't a punch. That was an explosion." Bruce smiles, but his eyes turn to the crowd, to the masters of the old systems. "This is not about Bruce Lee being better than Chuck Norris," Bruce announces to the room. "This is about the truth of combat. We spend so much time practicing the form of the punch, the beauty of the stance, that we forget what the punch is for. It is for the direct, efficient transfer of force. If your style traps you in a pattern, it is a cage. You must be like water. Water doesn't have a style, it just flows, and when it hits with the weight of the entire ocean." One of the senior Japanese masters, a man who has taught traditional karate for 40 years, steps forward. He looks at Chuck, then at Bruce. He bows a deep, formal bow that signals a shift in the entire hierarchy of the evening. "I have taught the hidden power of the kata for decades," the master says. "Tonight I saw it made visible, but it did not come from the kata. It came from a man." The ballroom, which had been a place of ego and competition, has transformed into a temple of learning. The witnesses aren't talking about trophies anymore. They are talking about the speed of no thought. They are talking about the empty hand. And somewhere in the back of the room, a young student who would later become a legend himself realizes that he has just seen the birth of a new era. The 9 seconds are over, but the ripples are just beginning to spread. The night doesn't end with the strike. For the next 3 hours, the ballroom becomes a laboratory. Inspired by what they saw, other masters began to ask questions, to test their own theories against Bruce's revolutionary principles. Chuck Norris, despite the ache in his chest, stays by Bruce's side. He is no longer the challenger, so he is the fellow researcher. They spend the early hours of the morning demonstrating the chisao or sticky hands drills, showing how sensitivity and tactile awareness allow a smaller man to control a larger one. The boxing champions in the room are fascinated by Bruce's footwork, the fencing movements he adapted to close the distance. The judo masters study the way he uses leverage and gravity. Bruce is in his element, a teacher who doesn't demand followers but invites explorers. "Do not believe me because I dropped a champion," Bruce tells a group of young black belts. "Believe in your own experience. Test everything. Absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, and add what is specifically your own." As the sun begins to rise over the Nevada desert, casting a pale gold light over the neon-soaked city, the ballroom finally begins to empty. The men walking out of the International Hotel are not the same men who walked in. They carry with them a secret memory of 9 seconds that defied everything they were taught. They know that if they tell the story to the public, no one will believe them. They will be told it was a trick, a stage punch, or a coordinated stunt between friends. But they saw the look on Chuck Norris's face. They heard the sound of the impact. They felt the air move. And they know that for one moment in a Las Vegas ballroom, the dragon showed them a glimpse of human potential that transcends style, race, and tradition. Long after the lights of the ballroom were turned off, and long after Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris became global icons of cinema, the story of the Las Vegas Challenge remained a whisper in the martial arts community. It was never filmed. There are no grainy 8mm clips of the moment Chuck Norris was lifted off his feet, but the impact of those 9 seconds can be seen in the evolution of combat sports. You can see it in the way modern fighters train the emphasis on functional movement over aesthetic form. You can see it in the birth of mixed martial arts, a concept Bruce Lee was essentially preaching in 1972. Chuck Norris would go on to say in later years that training with Bruce was like training with a supernatural force. He never spoke of the Vegas incident with embarrassment, only with a sense of wonder. To Chuck, being hit by Bruce Lee wasn't a defeat. It was an education. It was the moment he realized that perfection is a moving target and that the greatest warrior is the one who is never satisfied with what he knows. For Bruce, the evening was a validation of his Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. He had proven that his philosophy wasn't just for the cameras, it was for the reality of the moment. As he walked out into the cool Vegas morning, a canvas bag over his shoulder, Bruce Lee knew that he had done more than win a challenge. He had planted a seed of doubt in the minds of the traditionalists, a seed that would eventually grow into a total revolution. The crowd had gone silent for 9 seconds, but the conversation he started that night would continue for the next 50 years. This is the story of the challenge that history tried to forget, but that every witness remembered until their final breath. The 9 seconds proved that in the world of the dragon, the smallest distance is often the greatest journey. As the two men walked away from the center of the room, the Grand Ballroom felt like it had been struck by lightning. The high-ranking masters and champions who had witnessed the strike weren't just surprised, they were fundamentally shaken. In the martial arts community of 1972, there were rigid hierarchies based on how many bricks you could break, or how many trophies you had won in point sparring tournaments. But what Bruce Lee had just demonstrated wasn't a tournament point. It was a total bypass of the physical and psychological defenses of a world-class fighter. Chuck Norris, the most disciplined karateka of his generation, had been reduced to a gasping observer of his own physical limitations in just 9 seconds. The observers, including men who had fought in back alleys and international arenas, began to move toward the spot where it happened. They weren't looking for blood, they were looking for an explanation. How could a man weighing 145 pounds generate enough penetrating force to lift a 210-pound champion off the ground with a movement that spanned only 3 inches? Bruce stood among them, perfectly calm, his energy contained. He began to explain that the power didn't come from his arm or his shoulder, but from the synchronization of his entire being, the legs, the hips, the core, and the mind, firing as a single unit. He spoke about the non-telegraphed movement, explaining that Chuck couldn't block because there was nothing for his brain to process until the energy was already inside his chest. The champions listened with a level of focus usually reserved for a master's final words, realizing that the boundary between movie performance and combat reality had just been permanently erased. To understand what happened in those 9 seconds, you have to look at the science Bruce Lee had spent years obsessing over. Bruce wasn't a mystic, he was a scientist of human movement who studied biomechanics and kinesiology with the same intensity that a doctor studies medicine. He understood that traditional karate punches often wasted energy through unnecessary tension and winding up, which gave the opponent time to react. For the Vegas demonstration, Bruce utilized what he called straight-line efficiency. By placing his hand just 3 inches from Chuck's sternum, he eliminated the travel time of a traditional punch. The power was generated through a kinetic chain. It started in the rear foot, pushed through the floor, rotated through the hips, and accelerated through the spine, culminating in a snap of the wrist at the moment of impact. This wasn't just hitting, it was the 1-inch punch applied to a living, moving target. The result was penetrating power rather than knockback power. Instead of the energy being spent pushing the skin, it traveled deep into the body, causing a shock wave that disrupted the diaphragm and the solar plexus, the command center of the nervous system. Chuck Norris, despite his massive chest muscles, couldn't brace against it because the force hit faster than his nerves could signal his muscles to contract. This was the ultimate validation of Bruce's philosophy, that in combat, economy of motion and scientific precision will always overcome brute force and traditional form. For Chuck Norris, that night in Vegas wasn't the end of his career. It was the true beginning of his evolution. Before this encounter, Chuck was the king of the point-sparing world, a place of controlled rules and established patterns. But Bruce Lee had shown him that there was a level of mastery that existed outside of the dojo and the tournament ring. In the weeks following the demonstration, the two men continued to train together in private, far from the eyes of the public. Chuck began to incorporate Bruce's ideas of adaptability and directness into his own training. He started to move away from the rigid, upright stances of traditional karate, experimenting with the fluid footwork and intercepting techniques of Jeet Kune Do. The bruise on his chest from that night faded within days, but the psychological impact lasted a lifetime. Chuck would later tell close associates that Bruce didn't just teach him how to punch, he taught him how to think. He realized that a champion who stops being a student is no longer a champion. This humility and willingness to empty his cup allowed Chuck Norris to transition from a karate fighter into a multidimensional martial artist and eventually a global superstar. He always credited those few seconds in the Vegas ballroom as the moment he truly understood that combat is not about the style, but about the individual's ability to adapt to the chaos of reality. The reason the Vegas Challenge remains one of the most whispered about legends is because Bruce Lee deliberately kept it private. He had no desire to humiliate Chuck Norris or to use the event as a marketing tool. In 1972, Bruce was already becoming a target for every traditional master who felt threatened by his revolutionary ideas. If the story of him dropping the world karate champion in 9 seconds had become a tabloid headline, it would have created an endless cycle of challenges and ego-driven confrontations. Bruce told the witnesses in the room that this wasn't a victory to be bragged about, but a lesson to be analyzed. He wanted the focus to be on the principles, the physics of the strike, and the philosophy of the mind, not on the names of the men involved. This commitment to privacy is why there is no film of the event, no official record in sports magazines. It was a handshake agreement between warriors to keep the truth within the community. But secrets of that magnitude have a way of leaking out through the memories of those who were present. The trainers, the students, and the fellow champions who saw it couldn't help but talk about the night the Dragons silenced the ballroom. They spoke of it in hushed tones in gyms from Los Angeles to Hong Kong, turning those 9 seconds into a benchmark for what was humanly possible. Bruce knew that a legend built on truth is more powerful than a fame built on publicity, and by keeping it secret, he ensured that the lesson would outlive the event. At the heart of Bruce Lee's success that night was his obsession with adaptability. He often said, "You must be shapeless, formless, like water." In the Vegas ballroom, Bruce was water, and Chuck Norris was the rock. While Chuck was committed to a specific defensive structure, Bruce was committed to nothing but the immediate reality of the space between them. He taught that a style is a cage because it forces you to respond to a situation in a predetermined way. If the opponent doesn't move the way your style says they should, you are lost. But if you have no style, you can become whatever the moment requires. When he stepped in front of Chuck, he didn't think, "I am going to use a Wing Chun punch," or "I am going to use a karate strike." He simply let his body find the path of least resistance to the target. This was the birth of Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. It was a rejection of the classical mess of traditional arts in favor of total directness. He showed the witnesses that the greatest fighter is not the one who knows the most techniques, but the one who can adapt to any situation without hesitation. This philosophy of being teachable and flexible was his greatest weapon. He didn't just beat Chuck's guard. He beat the very idea that a fixed guard could ever be a permanent solution to a fluid problem. The impact of those 9 seconds eventually reached far beyond the desert of Nevada. As the witnesses traveled back to their home countries, they brought with them a new gospel of combat. In the East, traditional masters began to reevaluate the rigid forms that had gone unchallenged for centuries. In the West, boxers and wrestlers started looking at martial arts not as dancing, but as a legitimate science of movement. The Vegas encounter was the big bang for what would eventually become mixed martial arts. It broke the style versus style debate by proving that the individual and the application of principles were what truly mattered. Bruce Lee became a symbol of a bridge between worlds, someone who took the ancient wisdom of the Orient and refined it with the scientific pragmatism of the West. He proved that truth has no nationality and that anyone who wanted to learn could find excellence through honest self-expression. The students who were in the ballroom that night became the trainers of the next generation, passing down the story of the 9-second lesson as a reminder to never become complacent in one's training. They taught their own students to empty their cups, to look for the simplicity in the complexity, and to understand that the ultimate goal of martial arts is not to fight others, but to master oneself. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Vegas challenge was the inevitable comparison between boxing, karate, and Bruce's emerging Jeet Kune Do. Muhammad Ali, the heavyweight champion of the world, was the gold standard for Western combat. Chuck Norris was the standard for Eastern karate. Bruce Lee stood in the middle, analyzing both with a critical eye. Bruce deeply respected the footwork and the lead-hand efficiency of boxing, but he felt it was limited by its rules and lack of lower body utilization. He respected the discipline of karate but felt it was trapped in dead forms. In Vegas, he demonstrated that Jeet Kune Do was the missing link. He used a boxer's flicker speed, a karateka's explosive power, and his own sensitivity training to create something entirely new. He showed that while a boxer might have the fastest hands, they could be intercepted by a fighter who understood timing and non-telegraphed movement. He showed that while a karateka might have the strongest strike, it could be neutralized by a fighter who understood flow and angles. The Vegas demonstration was the first time these worlds truly collided at their highest levels, and it was Bruce Lee who emerged as the one who could navigate between them all. He told the audience that he wasn't teaching them kung fu, but teaching them how to use their own bodies in the most efficient way possible, regardless of the art they practiced. Over the decades, the story of the 9 seconds has inevitably grown into a piece of modern mythology. Some claim Bruce Lee was blindfolded. Others say Chuck Norris was knocked through a wall. But the truth, as documented by the 200 witnesses, is actually more impressive than the exaggerations. The reality was a clean, surgical demonstration of total body control. It didn't need a wall to break or a blindfold to be miraculous. The miracle was the economy of motion. It was the fact that a human being could generate that much force from a standstill. The growth of the legend shows how much the world hungered for a hero who represented the triumph of skill over size and intelligence over aggression. Bruce Lee became that hero. But Bruce himself would have been the first to warn against a myth. He believed that idolizing a man was a mistake because it made the person feel separate from the principles. He wanted people to look at the finger pointing at the moon, not at the finger itself. The Vegas challenge wasn't about Bruce being a Superman. It was about the potential of the human machine when it is pushed to its absolute limit. The story survives not because it's a good fairy tale, but because it represents a moment of truth that every martial artist strives to reach, a moment where everything you have trained for is tested and found to be real. The legacy of the Vegas encounter is most visible in the mutual respect that remained between Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris until the end. They were never rivals in the way the media wanted them to be. They were brother warriors who had tested each other's souls. When they eventually filmed the famous fight scene in the Roman Colosseum for Way of the Dragon, the choreography was built on the real-world chemistry they had developed in Vegas and in their private training sessions. Chuck would later say that Bruce was the most influential person he ever met, not because of his fame, but because of his relentless pursuit of excellence. Bruce's legacy is not just the films, but the millions of people who took up martial arts because they wanted to feel the kind of freedom Bruce displayed. The 9 seconds in Vegas proved that martial arts is not a sport, but a way of life, a constant process of self-refinement and self-discovery. It showed that the ultimate victory is not in defeating an opponent, but in transcending your own limitations. As Bruce often said, the fight is just a mirror of who you are at that moment. The final lesson of the Vegas challenge is one that applies to everyone, not just fighters: the importance of self-knowledge. Bruce Lee didn't step into that ring to prove he was better than Chuck Norris. He stepped in to see if his own training had reached the level of reality. He told his students that all knowledge ultimately means self-knowledge. The 9 seconds were a test of his own honesty. Did he truly know the 1-inch punch, or was he just talking about it? Chuck Norris's participation was an act of courage because it meant risking his reputation to find a deeper truth. Both men emptied their cups that night. The silence that fell over the ballroom was the silence of a crowd witnessing a moment of absolute, unvarnished truth. Bruce Lee's message remains: Be your own master. Do not pray for an easy life, but for the strength to endure a difficult one. Whether you are facing a world champion or your own fears, the principles remain the same. Be direct, be efficient, and be honest with yourself. The dragon is gone, but the fire he lit in that Vegas ballroom still burns in the heart of every seeker who believes that there is always more to learn, always a higher level to reach, and that the greatest fight of all is the one for your own excellence.